there's negotiations in the very beginning when you're submitting an offer, right? And then there is negotiations in the middle of the transaction while you're in escrow, you know, helping your client get as much from the home inspections and any inspections that the buyer does to the property. That's the beauty and the ultimate goal. Now, three things that I want to stress and emphasize regarding requests of repairs, which is the buyer's RR form and the seller's response to the request of repairs, is the dynamics of whoever you represent, the buyer or the seller. It's all a negotiation finesse, okay? Here's the problem that I see a lot of agents do, and ultimately this is one of the pillars that ultimately end up killing the deal, where the deal gets canceled because the buyer and the seller do not see eye to eye. Now, there's three elements to the request of repairs in the negotiations. Is the buyer can submit the request, the seller can acknowledge the request and do nothing. The seller can counter that request and say, look, I'll do some of the repairs, or in lieu of the repairs, I can give you credit. Okay, that's number two. Or number three, the seller can say, nope, I'm not going to do either or. Okay, the property is being sold in as is condition. Therefore, if you want the property, you're going to go ahead and go forward. You got to release this as an inspection. Okay, so those are the three elements that you will be involved in. It doesn't matter who you represent, the buyer or the seller. It's knowing how to dance. All right, and I'm going to give you some insights on how you can approach those conversations to make it a win-win. At the end of the day is this. Remember, don't be that agent that kills the deal because your ego gets in the way. Be the agent that sees things from the outside looking in instead from the inside looking out. And the reason I want you to think that way is because what is the end goal here? The goal is to close the deal, so that way the buyer can get the house they want and the seller can sell their home that they want, and the agents get paid their commissions. All right, that is the end goal. That's what we are trying to achieve, is finish the transaction. Because I know for a fact that I don't want to be the buyer's agent, and now I'm going back to square one, looking for more property, setting appointments, submitting offers, crossing my fingers that the offer gets accepted, and then going through the motions of the transaction and requests of repairs. Now, the contract is very fine, and I'm going to give you two elements and two components to that as well. One of the components is that what we call the black and white of the contract. Then we have what is called the spirit of the contract. Okay. Now, in my 24 years of doing real estate, and then in 18 of those years, I believe, as a broker, I have the mentality of compliance. I look at things from a black and white perspective. Okay. But then I also have the mindset and the ability to see it from a spirit of the contract, the bend, the directed that sometimes it doesn't go the way the contract stipulates. And that's the cool thing about it. Once you start doing more and more transactions, you're going to understand, you know, that it doesn't necessarily always go as planned. And if you've done any numerous transactions, you understand it's a give and take. The buyer, the seller, the agents all have to contribute. And sometimes the lenders and escrows have to contribute. That's the winning team. That's the end goal to get you to close more transactions. I want you to be that agent that can bend a little bit and still be stern in your position. And one last thing, let the emotions out of the way. Get those emotions out of the way. Do not get entangled in the chaos and the emotions of the contract, because once you do so, it's game over. So I want to make sure that we have a practical conversation regarding the request of repairs and the dynamics on how you can make it a win-win. Now, remember, communication is the element of the best approach to get the deal done. When you have great communications from the very beginning, just before you even submit an offer, you're already building that rapport with the agent. you are winning. So keep that in mind as an arsenal of your position, is that communication, it is crucial. You want to give the bad, you want to give the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, we all love giving good news. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, your offer was accepted. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, unfortunately, the deal that you wanted did not get, our offer did not get accepted. Therefore, we have to go look at other properties, but they told us we can be on a backup offer. That's the bad. The ugly aspect of our position is you're in escrow, you're 29 days in on a 30-day escrow, and something happens that alters our position. And now we have to give those nasty calls to our clients why the seller is not performing or the buyer not performing. That is the ugly of the conversation. Well, guess what? Any of those three, you have to be able to communicate. And guess what? I've seen firsthand a lot of real estate agents that when they are out of their comfort zone, they don't want to communicate. They do not communicate. And that's when you start seeing problems. That's when you start seeing liability. That's when you start seeing complaints. And that's what ultimately causes attorneys to be involved, because the agents are not on the same page or are not communicating. So all of you on the call today, I appreciate you all. And again, this is just another element in how you can approach these requests, okay? And again, feel free to raise your hand or say, hey, Simon, I have a question. If I don't see it on the chat, just say, hey, you know what, Simon, I have a question. It's an open mic conversation. And again, no question is a wrong question, okay? Oh, it's an open mic. So if you have any doubts whatsoever or do not understand, please let me know. I'm here to help, okay? I have 24 years of experience. I've dealt with mediations, arbitrations, lawsuits. Heck, I've been sued more times, even though I'm not even part of the transaction. That is the problem when you are running a large real estate office, okay? You get named in a lot of these complaints. So I've seen it all, I've been involved, so I can probably give you some insights in how to negotiate these sensitive positions, because again, buyers will ultimately back out of the deal if they don't get what they want, but it's a way on how you approach it. Now, the information I'm going to provide you is very black and white, okay? But I'm going to give you case scenarios as well and how you can approach, you know, your position as a professional. Louis, you have a question, sir?
Yes. I would like to know how not to get sued so many times, if you don't mind. What is your best advice on any through the documentation or dealing with the clients? What is the best advice you can give us?
So if I heard you correctly, you said you want to know the reason how come I got sued so many times?
Yeah, I don't want to get that so many times. So what is your best advice to follow?
I'll be quite honest with you. I've been sued many times. Guess what? I am not good at what I do. That's why.
No, but what do you think is the
I'm just
basic
kidding,
reason?
You know, at the end of the day, Louis, you know, we have no control over the buyers and sellers, right? We can do everything correctly. We can go based on the contract. And if someone is not comfortable or is not in any way, shape happy, you know, they have the right to speak with an attorney. And what do attorneys want to do? They know that, you know, real estate companies have deep pockets. They know that we have insurances that cover our agents. So sometimes they want to try to shoot to see if they can file a claim. That was the only reason. You know, we've won most of those cases. We've settled with a few of those cases, but it never got escalated to any real serious, just time and obviously money. And that's the whole purpose of why we have insurance that covers the company and it covers the agent as well. Now, with that being said, you know, I'm putting this disclaimer, okay? I'm only speaking for my agents here in the South Bay office, the Torrance office. Whatever market center that you are, please, please, please reach out to your broker and ask questions as well, okay? This is just for the sake of training, but always get the advice of your broker, okay? So I'm putting that disclaimer, and that your broker will probably we'll reach out to the legal department as well. I do that many times where if it feels a little too sensitive, then maybe I can get my attorneys involved in the in this case, so that way we can at least get the experts from the legal department to help us navigate some of the transactions. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Louis.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much, Simon.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so going back to negotiating repairs using the RR and the RRRR, better known as the request of the seller's response to the buyer's request. What is R and what is the two different R forms? So the two R's, the RR, request for repairs, and then the seller's response to the buyer's reply to the request. So if you represent the buyer, okay, there's only one form that you're going to submit that request, which is the RR form. If you represent the seller, then you as the seller will respond back on the seller's response of the buyer's reply. Now, what if the buyer sends out another request? Okay, so these forms are similar to counteroffers. You got counteroffers, and then you have multiple counteroffers. Then you have seller, you got buyer counteroffers, and then you have two seller counters, the seller counteroffer and the seller's multiple counteroffers. So those distinguishes are similar to the request repairs. All right. The counteroffers are in the beginning stages of submitting an offer. The seller responds to the buyer's offer either on the counteroffer, which is a single counter, or the seller and the listing agent respond back to on a multiple counteroffer when there's multiple offers that there are also negotiating to see which is going to give you the best price, terms, and condition. Well, the request of repairs is similar. The buyer will send out the request and the seller will have to respond to that request. Now, I say should respond to that request, meaning that the buyer can submit and the seller doesn't necessarily have to respond. Per the contract is very clear and concise, and the contract says that, you know, the seller may respond to the buyer's request. So everyone should know that the removal of contingency, right? The removal of the inspection contingency is 17 days per the contract. Now, that can also be modified. That could be modified when you submit the offer. That could be part of the negotiations on the counter offers where the seller says, look, we'll entertain your offer if you reduce your physical inspections from 17 days down to 10 days. And if the buyer accepts those terms, then the buyer will have to honor that position. And when the 10th day comes, the buyer shall release physical inspections of that condition. Okay, so the default amount is 17 days to release physical inspections. So let's just say, for example, your offer got accepted, right? You're in escrow, congratulations. Now the ticking time of events happen. Now that 17-day falls on a weekend or a holiday. Guess what? The contract says that the buyer has the right to release that as a condition on the next business day. Now, the new purchase agreement that will be in full effect in December is going to change. And part of that change means that it's all going to be calendar days. It's not going to have, or if it falls in the weekend or holiday provision. So right now, it does fall under those provisions. So that 17 days can literally be 19 days. And if it falls on a holiday and a weekend, then typically you have 3 additional days from the 17. So that means 18, 19, 20. By the 20th day, then they can release that as a condition. So knowing these calculations will help you arm yourself if you need that extra time. Now, with that being said, Chris, can you do me a favor? Just close the glass doors for me, please. Thank you, sir. Now, with that being said, everything is all negotiable, okay? So meaning is that, again, The seller may say, I will not give you 17 days because I got other buyers that are willing to release that as a condition or reduce their inspection period. So be advised, if you are representing the buyer, the importance of understanding the timelines of events when it comes to these requests. Okay, this is why we have documentation to protect and ultimately to have a paper trail. If this transaction ultimately goes in a wrong way or sideways, and then there's attorneys, how do you protect yourself? By paper trail. This is why we have these forms, to protect you, to protect the consumer, the buyer, or the seller. Because once someone breaches the contract, then there can be possibly damage involved. So I want to be crystal clear in your position as a professional, but more so the sensitivity of what these forms indicate. Okay. Now, used to facilitate the negotiations of repairs and removal of contingency. So let's continue on. So how does the RR form work? Buyer's request. Buyer's request repairs using the form. List of repairs are too long. Zip forms will automatically attach a text overflow addendum. So again, you can be as detailed as you want, which is very important to do so. If the buyer is requesting, a lot of items to be repaired, replaced, then when you fill out that request of repairs, don't worry. The form already recognizes if you are doing more than what the paragraph allows you, the form automatically will include what's called an overflow addendum. And that overflow is additional terms that you're adding to the request of repairs. You don't see it immediately, you just keep typing away. When you're ready to submit, either for DocuSign or print it for wet signatures, that's when you'll see the additional overflow addendum included with the request of repairs. Termite repairs can be requested upon a already conducted inspection. So many years ago, the termite, and it wasn't called termite, it's called pest. What was it called back then? Gosh, on top of my head, I can't, but the termite per se was something that was included on the purchase agreement. It was called the WPA. The WPA form was part of the agreement on the purchase agreement in the very second page of the RPA, the purchase agreement. So that has been eliminated. And the reason it was eliminated was because the lenders were red flagging the purchase agreements. Remember, everything that you put on the RPA, the purchase agreement, the lenders will get as well. So I caution you, the less, the better. The more, the red flags that the underwriter may have. Remember, you're the buyer representing you're the buyer's agent representing the buyer. And the buyer may not know the initial process, may ask a lot of questions. And your response to that is that part of the initial process, your due diligence, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you have the right to do as many inspections as you like within that time period. If it means 100 inspections, guess what? The seller cannot decline the buyer from doing as many inspections within that time frame. What is the time frame? 17 days. Okay, so if the buyer wants to do a general inspection, if the buyer wants to do a plumbing inspection, a sewer inspection, electrical inspection, a roof, structural, whatever the inspections that the buyer wants to do, that falls under the buyer's due diligence period. Once the 17-day hits, then the buyer must release those that condition in order to continue the process. If the buyer does not release the contingency, then the seller can send out what is called a notice to perform. Mr. Mrs. Buyer, you are unnoticed. We have given you enough ample time to release and do all your inspections. It is 17 days, and therefore we're requesting that you release this. And if you don't, here's the notice to perform. You have 48 hours to perform. And after 48 hours, if the buyer does not release that as a condition or ask for an extension of time, the seller has the right to cancel. The right to cancel. So I want to make sure that all of you are on that same page. You don't want to first get a notice to perform, because that's the ticking time frame for the buyer to release that. And there may be legitimate reasons why the buyer cannot release that as a condition. And if it's something that they cannot release, that's fine. This is where I say communication is crucial. You want to communicate with the listing agent. And how you do it is very simple. Mr. or Mrs. Listing Agent, I know that the inspection is due tomorrow, but my client is still is trying to set some appointments with other additional contractors, and we need to extend that time frame till Saturday. So we need Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, at least 4 additional days to release that as a condition. Now, the buyer can put that request, the seller can acknowledge the request, but the seller can also say, no, I'm not going to give you that extension. Okay, but remember what I said earlier, you want to do the give and take, right? If you are at least having communication and there's reinsurance that the buyer is still moving forward, then there's no reason why the seller can not allow you the extension till Saturday. Okay, and there can be many hiccups. Maybe the buyer just could not facilitate the time frame in a timely manner because of their work schedule, and they want to be there. Whatever the reason is, it's a give and take. What are the deemed reasonable repair requests? That's a very good question. Okay, so in the eyes and the scope of the contract, if you understand the contract, the buyer can put a request to anything, meaning they can put a request that they want the entire roof replaced, including the plywood underneath the roof. The buyer may say, we need to request the AC to be serviced or replaced because it's at the end of its lifespan. And that AC unit may be in the thousands, $5,000 to $8,000, depending on the size of the home. The buyer may also request, that the sewer line is at the last of its years as well. The original home was built in the 1950s. After looking at a sewer inspection video cam, it looks like there's a lot of damage to the sewer line, and it's only a matter of time before that sewer line busts and the overflow of all the waste goes back to the house. So the buyer is requesting the seller to get that replaced as part of the initial process. And that's an $8,000 to $12,000 cost. Okay, that can be included as part of the request. Now, I hear this quite often. We don't want to insult the buyer, or excuse me, we don't want to insult the seller. If we put these crazy requests, the seller is going to say, go pound sand. And the seller has the right to do so. Remember, the contract says the property is being sold in its as-is present condition. Meaning, as long as the seller discloses to the buyer that the property is at the last of it falling or collapsing, and as long as they disclose that and the buyer is aware of it, the seller can sell that property to the buyer. And at close of escrow, the house falls apart, that's okay. They covered all bases because they explained that to the buyer that the house was in pretty bad shape. And at the end, the seller does not have to agree to any of the buyer's requests and say, in all due respect, we're not going to do anything. The property is being sold in its as-is condition. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. Now, remember what I said, it's the give and take. Because if I was the listing agent, I would be having conversations with my sellers. This is a great offer. What they're asking may be reasonable or unreasonable, but you want to at least respond to the buyer's request. And I've seen some really ridiculous amounts, $50,000, $40,000, $30,000. And maybe the house merits those conditions. And I've seen where the seller does give in that amount. Now, it all really depends on the conditions, because remember, if the buyer has a lender involved, there are certain conditions that will alter if the buyer is going to be able to get all the credits. Because the underwriter who analyzes the applications, the income, all the assets, and ultimately, screens out the property, if the underwriter feels that the property may be a liability, meaning there's too many issues with the home, the lender may say no to lending the money, and you may have to go in a different direction. So keep this in mind when looking at properties, especially if you're FHA, VAs, or certain conventional loans. The less down payment, the more the bank is taking a risk. And the reason the bank sees all this is very simple. They don't want this house to have all these problems. And now they take on the responsibility because the buyer walks away from paying the mortgage. And now the bank forecloses on the buyer and now takes possession on the property they couldn't sell, or at least get their money in return. Okay, so those are some of the dilemmas on why the underwriter is very particular and really dissects these conditions. So if you can avoid adding additional stuff to the purchase agreement, even better. Don't add home inspections. Don't add termite inspections. Don't add sewer inspections, because now that you put that on the purchase agreement, now that gives the underwriter the right to say, it looks like they agreed to a termite inspection. I wonder how that termite inspection looks like. I'm putting that as a request and as a condition. And guess what? Your LO, your loan officer, if they get that request, unfortunately, the buyer's agent will have to, and the buyer will have to provide them with that condition or that report. And what if that report is $10,000 worth of termite infestation? They need to tent the house. They need to replace certain beams, okay? But the seller is selling the property as is. And now the underwriter says, look, we're not gonna lend if someone doesn't take care of that. So that's why I'm saying, if you can be under the radar, folks, less is best. Less is best. Remember, you still have the time frame to do so.
Simon, I have a quick question about that.
Yes.
Are the RR and the RRR forms, are those more under the radar than putting them on the RPA? Or how would we go about being more under the radar, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah. The less that you put on the purchase agreement, the better it looks, because remember, the underwriter doesn't get the request of repairs or the seller's response. The only thing that the underwriter will get is the purchase agreement and any counteroffers. So if the seller sent out a counteroffer on the buyer's offer, and then now the buyer sends out a counteroffer in regards to the seller's counteroffer, then all those counteroffers have to be included with the purchase agreement. If you don't put on section page 2 of the purchase agreement, any additional where it says buyer or seller to pay for or reports to have, that's where you want to leave it blank. And the reason I want you to leave it blank, especially on the traditional VA, FHA, and certain conventional loans, is because you don't want to red flag the underwriter. You're still going to be able to do all the inspections, but you don't need to disclose that to the lender. And it's not a bad thing. It's not that you're doing anything wrong or unethical. You just don't want the extra problems and delays of this process to not to continue, because that can happen where the lender will not allow this process because they haven't approved the loan. And now you're not able to release the loan contingency because the lender has red flagged this particular transaction. So if you can avoid putting any type of request or reports on the purchase agreement, it's better. Now, again, can you put that? Yeah. It allows you to put this additional inspections and additional requests on the RPA, but it's not necessary. Every lender is unique in itself. I'd rather avoid having additional letters of explanation. That's what the lenders call it. They call them LEs. They call them LE forms, or letter of explanation. Now you have your lender has to give a letter of explanation why the buyer requested a termite, and then the letter of explanation may ask that they want to see the termite inspection. Whatever the buyer decided, the seller decided to do, that's between them. But the problem is, because under the regulations of the regulations of the lender, they have to, because at the end of the day, they package these loans and they send it on the secondary market. They sell it to investors that will buy these deeds of trust because they need the capital to lend to new buyers. So they want to make sure that the loan and the borrower are solid before they sell it to the end user, which is the secondary market. So that way they can get additional capital to buy more loans. And it's just a cycle. So the less is best, okay? The less you put into the purchase agreement, the better. All this can be negotiated without putting it on the purchase agreement, okay? So to answer your question, the request of repairs, the RR and the RRRR form are not part of the agreement that the underwriter will get or the lender will get. And if they ask for it, you know, you can decline to. You can say, well, it was never part of the agreement, okay? If they ask you a direct question, was there a termite, then you cannot lie. But if they say something, you know, can we get a copy? Well, that was not part of the agreement. Well, was there a termite done? Well, you know what, that's a direct question. Unfortunately, yeah, there was. But then you can always fall back and say, well, that was never part of the agreement, and utilize that as a position, because that is not going to be part of the negotiations, if that makes any sense.
Hi, Simon. I'm Miriam. I'm the one who asked the question about what reasonable repairs
Yeah.
are, because I'm actually going through the process right now with, I'm in the middle of an escrow. And for example, if the disclosure, in the disclosure, the seller says that, oh, he's not aware of any like settling or anything like on the floor, but then we did the inspection and definitely noticed like bumps and like stuff, would that be a reasonable thing to mention?
Absolutely. Let's just say, for example, you represent the buyer and it's on a raised foundation.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you walk in the house, you notice that the house is tilting.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I can see that. When I see a house and it looks kind of odd, then it's probably a foundation issue. Now, I'm not an expert, but I can tell when something looks off. And you can probably do the marble test or something that you can see if the floor is even or not. If the marble moves, and I've seen houses that are on raised foundations, folks, and the house, either certain areas because of either termite infestation, or maybe the home, you know, is early 1900s built and it's almost 100 years or 80 years old. You know, houses eventually, just like vehicles and human beings, we start slowing down. Well, property as well. Now, to me, that's not a major issue, because any good contractor knows how to raise the property back and level the house if it is on certain areas that are weak or have been damaged due to infestations or maybe even earthquakes. And there's companies out there that they can lift that side, put new pillars of wood in there to balance it out and raise it up, and then you're okay.
This is a condo.
Okay, but even a condo, I'm saying that
Yeah.
if the buyer puts in that request, anything can be reasonable.
Okay.
Anything that the buyer feels comfortable saying, hey, I want to get the AC taken care of, or, you know, this carpet also. Now, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the buyer can throw it whatever and hopes it sticks. The buyer can say, I want $50,000, in repair request. Now, here are the three things that the seller can do as part of the initial negotiations. One, the buyer can say, look, I will do certain repairs, I will give you credit, or I will do a price reduction. And all three of those items can be part of the agreement. Credit, repairs, and then price reduction. Again, you want to speak with the lender to make sure that the lender is okay, the LO. And the LO will probably reach out to his branch manager to make sure that the branch manager is aware of the scenario and that it will not cause any delays once it gets to the underwriter. Because once they submit it to underwriter for a final approval, then that's where the issues and delays can happen. So, and to answer your question regarding condominiums and who do you represent, who now, the buyer?
The buyer, yeah. I just wanted to know, I mean, because obviously I want to get the best deal for my buyer, but I also don't want to like be too annoying. So there are like little things like it's missing the carbon monoxide thing, and I know like that's a safety hazard, but it's not very expensive, right? Or like the balcony, the patio screen is ripped. Are those petty things to ask, or is it okay to still put it in?
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. Here's my suggestion. You always want to throw it back at the buyer. So here's the example. You're going to be the buyer. I'm going to be the agent on this scenario. Okay. So are you? Let me see. Are you? Okay. Hi. All right. So here it is. We're going to role play a little bit. Okay. You're the buyer, and I'm the agent. All right, after looking at all the requests, or excuse me, after looking at all the reports, you know, what is the biggest concern you have with the home inspection that you want to address to the seller? Just throw anything that you feel that, and you can say everything. Yeah. So let's just kind of role play a little bit.
That the heater didn't work and that the AC unit is old and approaching its lifespan, so it could break down at any time, and according to the report it's an older model and the replacement parts are discontinued, so I'm worried that if anything happens I would have to replace the entire unit and it would cost like up to $10,000.
Got it. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. Here's my position. We can definitely ask the seller. We're going to send a request of repairs. Now, remember one thing, this is a give and take. At the end of the day, the property is sold in its as-is condition. So if the seller comes back and says no to your request, how do you feel about that? Are you okay continuing with the purchase of the property? Or is it something that you're going to be hesitant and not want to move forward?
Yeah, I would have to think about it because I already offered 20,000 above asking, and the disclosures don't state that the AC unit is old or that the heater doesn't work. Right,
and that's completely reasonable in our opinion. You know, I definitely want to have you buy this property that's in move-in conditions without any headaches or problems. Now, one of the other avenues is that we can ask for what's called a home warranty as well. It's a 1-year warranty that allows you, if there's any problems that exist after you move into the property, the home warranty company will come in, evaluate the air condition and determine if it is. Now, we can put that request, okay? So I just want to prepare you for that we can put the request. Now, in my opinion, is, you know, the true pride of ownership. Put yourself in the seller's position. One day you're going to also be selling that property, and a buyer comes and says, hey, it's not a new unit, but I want you to replace it with a new unit. How will you feel about that? Now, even though that it's at the end of its lifespan, we don't know when that lifespan will end. It can be 6 months or a year from now. So is that truly what you want to request? Now, the only thing that the seller can come back and say yes to it, no to it, or I'll give you credit, or we can even ask for a price reduction. And any of those will you be okay with?
Yeah, I'd be okay with price reduction.
Okay. Well, that's the cool part about, this segue of our process is that those are the elements that can happen. A credit, they can replace it or repair it to give you additional, warranty that allow it for another year or two before it really comes down to replacing the entire unit. Because remember, the seller can say no, and then you have to make that decision if you want to release this as a condition. And if you don't, then we end up canceling. And after looking at all the homes, I want to make sure that you are okay with that. Because I know this hits all the bells and whistles. This is what you wanted, the location, the schools, all the amenities that you wanted. Is this going to be a deal breaker if you don't get this AC repaired or replaced? Okay.
Yeah.
So
the floors are like curved and uneven, so they might have to be replaced.
hey, I'm batting for you. Believe me, I want to bat for you, and I'm going to do my very best to make sure that I can at least work with the listing agent. And the good thing is I have a good relationship with the listing agent, Lewis, and he's going to bat for us as well. That's the awesome part, because he also will lose on this too if we cannot close the deal. So it's a win-win. But we also have to look at the big picture. The seller can say no to that request. I just want to make sure that you and I are on the same page. I'm going to bat for you. I'm going to do my very best and hope that we can at least get something, or at least get the entire unit replaced. Or even better, let you decide what AC you want to replace, and they just give us a credit for $5,000 or $8,000. That's something better than nothing. Then when you close the deal, now you can shop around and look for whatever unit you want instead of what the seller wants to replace. Is that fair as well?
Sure. So I did put the AC, the home warranty for the AC in the offer. So
Okay.
does that cover if anything happens to the AC?
Well, if you included the optional premium package, then yeah, because usually a general home warranty is only for certain items like your outlets and plumbing and all that stuff. But if you want additional, then you have to request it as the AC, the heater, if it has a pool or a spa. Those are additional premiums added to the home warranty. So did you check off?
I checked off AC.
Okay. And yeah,
up to $300 for the home.
okay, then that should definitely cover you in case the buyer moves into the property, as long as it's not an existing. Because here's the thing, and this is where home warranties are very sneaky. They may want to ask for a copy of that home inspection report. This is why you don't want to include that on the RPA, because they may ask, for a copy of the home, the purchase agreement, right? And if they see home inspection, then they're going to see that this was already a pre-existing scenario, and therefore, if it's a pre-existing situation, most likely the home warranty will not cover the AC. So be very cautious of how you approach this. At the end of the day, it's about pride of home ownership. It's like buying a used car, okay? It's not going to be in mint condition. It's going to have some problems. Do you want to jeopardize this beautiful home over the AC? And again, that's our job as consultants, right? Our job is to navigate and help the buyer, the seller, push them a little bit, because we want to ultimately close the deal and make them feel that, okay, I understand your concern, but this is not the biggest issue. We still have a beautiful home. It has all the amenities you're looking. You wanted the fireplace in your bedroom, which was one of the hardest things to find, especially in this area. Is the AC really a deal killer for you? If it is, I completely understand. We'll shoot for it and hope for the best. If the seller comes back with an answer, yes, no, then we'll at least know where we stand. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Very good question. Thank you. Thank you for role playing with me. I know sometimes, It's not easy to role play amongst other agents, but I really appreciate you doing that. All right, let's continue real quick with our presentation, and we should be almost done. So give sellers copies of the report, request sellers to share with future buyers if the request is declined. So yeah, that's very important. Here's the thing. Termite repairs can be requested upon on already conducted inspections, also used to request credit or price reduction in lieu of repairs. Credit must be disclosed to the lender. Total credit may not exceed lender allowable credit. Okay, so yeah. Remember, as a buyer's agent, one of the main ingredients is always ask for advice and always ask the lender. Because if the buyer is asking for a substantial amount, the lender may not allow it. Now, there's ways around it that you can do this, okay? One of the ways is obviously to break it into segments. A percentage of the credit, a percentage of price reduction. So let's just say it's a $10,000 request. But the lender says, I can only use $5,000 towards your closing cost, the credit, because that's what it ultimately will go towards its buyer's closing cost. So what you can do is, look, we'll take the $10,000, because if we don't use the whole 10,000, then unfortunately the 5,000 goes back to the seller's net. So be creative, think outside the box, and then ask the lender and how the best way to approach that. 5,000 in credit, 5,000 of price reduction. If it's an $800,000 price point, you reduce it now to if the price is 900,000 and it's 10,000, 5 for credit, then the 895 will be now the new purchase price. You just reduce the 5,000. The lender would be okay with that. Even though you're not getting the 10,000 for the credit or repairs, you're getting the price reduction of your home or the buyer's home. So that's another avenue you can also do. Or you can also say, look, if it's 10,000, we can break it into three ways. Okay, so what is $10,000 divided by $10,000, divide that by 3. That's about $3,300. So $3,300 can go in credit. $3,300 can be the repairs that the seller will do up to $3,300, and then the rest of the $3,300 can go towards the reduction of price. So you can request all those 3 things, or you can request 1 or 2 things. So I want to be very clear that the request of repairs doesn't necessarily mean one or the other. It can mean all 3: credit, price, and then some repairs. Okay, so I want to make sure that you're clear on that. If the seller agrees to the buyer's signed request of repairs, the identified contingencies are automatically removed with the buyer's signatures. Well, that's a very sensitive situation, and it does not automatically be removed. I don't know why the California Association of Realtors added this provision, because the contract really is very clear that it says that the seller, that the buyer will have to release the contingency on the contingency removal form, better known as the CR form. Okay, so it doesn't automatically come out, because again, I've seen scenarios where if the buyer does not release that as a condition, just because it identifies on the request of repairs, the buyer can come back and say, look, I never released that. I never signed the CR form. Therefore, I'm canceling and I'm going after my own deposit to be returned back to me. So be very cautious. Always send the request of repairs, sign and execute it, but also get the contingency removal as well to protect your buyer's position. So the sellers respond. The seller can respond with the RR if seller agrees to everything or nothing. So on the form itself, if the seller is fine with the buyer's request and a signature on the request of repair saying I agree to all the buyer's terms, congratulations, you got what the buyer wanted. Okay, if the buyer feels, no, you know what, I am not in agreement with that, then that's when you have to provide them with the request of repairs. The RRRR, seller agrees to some or make any changes to that request. No response to the request, but a response is a courtesy. So again, the seller does not have to respond, folks. So the seller can be radio silent throughout the entire 17 days. Meaning you send out the request on the 10th day and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and the 17 days comes, and now the seller sends you the CR form, the contingency removal, and you're saying, wait a minute, we never got a response. What the contract says, the seller doesn't have to respond to any buyer's request. So this is why I say crucial and very important that you're always constantly communicating with the listing agent, so that there's a meeting of the mind, but there's at least dialogue and conversations. And yeah, you can also do a follow-up courtesy. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, we sent out the request, just wanted to do a follow-up to see if we have any response from the seller. Usually when that listing agent gets that call, they'll say, hey, Simon, I appreciate the request. We still have not heard from the we still haven't heard from the seller as of yet, but we should be getting an answer this afternoon or tomorrow. Okay, wonderful. I really appreciate the update. I will relay that information to my buyer. Okay, there you go. It's when you have no communications, that's when it can be a problem, and this is where it may go sideways and the deal fall apart. Seller agreement is a conditional. Buyer must agree to remove and identify the contingency. Absolutely, 100%. The seller is agreeing to the terms of that request in lieu of that you remove that as a condition. Now, I want to caution you, and I know we're close to our time. We got another less than 10 minutes, and I'll try to wrap it up as fast as I possibly can. And then we'll open it up for any questions you have. But here it is, folks, that this is a conditional agreement, and I highly, highly recommend that if you represent the seller on this case, do not, if the seller agrees to do any repairs, including termite, do not do it before the buyer signs off on the contingencies. Don't do it. Do not advise your sellers to do so. The reason I say that you don't allow the seller to do so is because the buyer still is holding on to contingencies. And if the buyer at the end decides, you know what, I'm canceling, there's really an upscale challenge to try to argue that you were damaged. Okay. Well, I did all these repairs and it cost me $15,000. I want to go after the buyer's deposit. Yeah, but did the buyer release that as a condition? Well, no, but I still did the repairs in good faith that he was. I get it. But you know, your agent should have advised you not to do that because the buyer did not release that as a condition. So what I'm saying, and I'm putting this as a disclaimer, folks, is very simple. If you are representing the seller, wait to do any repairs, including termite, fumigating the house where you're actually putting the tent, because remember, now that's going to be cost. That's going to be cost to you or to your sellers. So once the buyer releases all contingencies, which is usually within a 2-week period of closing, that's more than ample amount of time to do all the repairs that the seller agreed to do so. Okay. Now, if it's a severe situation, meaning that it's a foundation situation, that it may take a little longer to do so, then you may want to do an extension to close escrow and give you that extra time frame. If it's 3 weeks, then add another week to your escrow to allow you the 2 weeks you have plus an additional week to close this deal, so you make sure that the property is done and that the buyer is completely satisfied. And that's only once the buyer has released any and all contingency, folks. Do not start doing any type of repairs or advise your clients to do any repairs until the buyer has released all contingencies. And I've seen it firsthand, folks. I've seen it. This is why I'm cautioning you not to, advise your clients to do any repairs. Just because the seller agrees and the buyer sent out the request, don't go say, seller, go ahead and do the work, because the buyer can back out. Now the seller did unnecessary requests, because if it falls out, you're now back to square one. You've now put the property back on the market, and who knows what this new buyer is going to request. They may request other stuff, and now you just spent $10,000, and now this new buyer is requesting other stuff. So wait to get all these repairs done after the buyer has released all contingencies.
Quick question, Simon, this is Emilio.
Yes, sir.
So in either case, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, would it be maybe best to advise the client or maybe work it out with the listing or the buyer agent, depending on who you're representing, to do maybe a credit at close of escrow? That way there's no.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%, Amelia. Thank you. At the end of the day, folks, it would be just best, let the buyer do what they want to do, ask for the credit instead of the repairs. It's just a lot easier, it's a lot smoother, and then the buyer has the peace of mind that they are going to do what they want. Maybe it's a specific name brand that they want to add, and they don't want to pay, the seller doesn't want to pay premium for it, but because you got the credit, it offsets some of the costs. So 100% yes. If you can avoid the seller from doing any repairs, because now you go into, is it something that you're going to need permits? Certain cities may request that anything that you're going to modify to the property may need city approval or permits, and that can delay the process. So the best approach would be, is like Emilio said, hey, just give me the credit, give me the 10,000 and we're good with that. Once the deal closes, obviously the buyer can go in there and do whatever they want. They're the new homeowners, and they can take their time, but get it done with their crew and their certain name brand that they want. Good question.
Yeah, or some items that might be hard to get, especially lately.
Absolutely. Yep. Another is they may not have the part or the unit that you want, and that may delay the process. So again, 100%, that is correct. Go best if we can just do the credit, and it's easier for the seller too, folks. They clean their hands. Look, I'm just going to give you the credit, and the guy may be, he or she, or they may be handymans. They may have a niche of doing stuff, but we're on a timeline and a crunch time, right? I'd rather have the buyer handle that once we close than having the seller stress over the time. And that may be that you're representing the seller in this. You don't want to be in the chaos of this. And if something happens, that can delay the process of closing. And if it's not done correctly after the deal closes, now they're calling you and saying, hey, the seller did this shady work, and they got a handyman instead of a contractor. So there's many elements to that you just want to avoid. Better is just give the credit and be done with it. Close the deal, the buyer will get the credit, and the rest is history. Now, I get this a lot too, is, do they get a check for the $10,000? How does all that work? No. Escrow will never cut a check for the request and the granted of the seller. What happens is, when the buyer comes in to bring in the final funds, including down payment and closing costs, they'll subtract the $10,000 from the buyer's closing costs, because the seller will ultimately give that credit part of the seller's net sheet. Okay, so it's not like at close of escrow is going to cut a check for repairs or for the AC for $10,000. That's not how it works. How it works is escrow will deduct that from the buyer's closing costs or down payment. So if the closing cost is $10,000, let's say, well, they don't have to come in with the $10,000 because the credit is already being applied by the seller. The only thing that the buyer will come in is with the down payment. Does that make sense? Okay, good question. All right, section 1A, the list, those repairs seller will not make. Seller agreement is conditional, which is what we recap. Buyer must agree to remove and identify contingencies, which we already talked about. Buyer may accept seller's response, okay, or counter on term 1B or make any new requests. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. So let's just say that the buyer submits that request, and the buyer submits that request, and the seller comes back and says, nope, I'm not going to do it. Now the buyer can do what's called a request of repairs number 2. If the first one didn't go through, let's try a different one. Maybe they asked for 10,000, but on the second one, they're only asking for 5,000. So you can and you shall do a request number 2. If that gets declined, guess what? You can do a 3, you can do a 4, you can do as many requests. Now, at one point or time, it's going to be a nuisance. So I caution you, don't go going bananas and bonkers and submitting 10 different requests. You'll get the point after the second, possibly the third request. If you're getting a no to it, then most likely the seller was not going to entertain anymore. You either have to make a decision to move forward or not to move forward, and the buyer can cancel, retain their deposit, and go find another property. Make sense? Okay. Buyer signature removal, identify contingency. No signature is needed on the contingency removal form, but doing so can cause no harm and can be helpful. So here's my point. I know it says this, and I think there's some discrepancy to this, because again, the contingency removal, it reinforces your position that if the buyer down the line says, well, I did not sign off on the contingency, I'd rather play it safe and say, you know what, let's get this contingency removal. Here it is. I have it signed off by the buyer, but the buyer did release that as part of the process and part of the contingency period. Okay. A buyer counter, the seller needs to complete section 3 of the request. Otherwise, this section is left blank. Yeah. So basically, is whatever direction that the buyer and the seller, you want to enforce it by either signing or no signing. Is the seller obligated to make any repairs? The answer is no, with 2 exceptions. 1, the RPA paragraph 11, property is sold as is condition. There you go, folks, okay? It already stipulates on the, in paragraph 11, do some research, do your due diligence, go to your RPA and look at paragraph 11. It says crystal clear, all property are sold in as is present condition. As the date of acceptance, seller must repair damage to the property that occurs between the date of acceptance and before close of escrow. So if there is damage while you're in escrow, okay, something happened, a busted pipeline, right? Water is spilling. The seller cannot say, well, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I got 15 days left till this escrow closes. I'm going to let the water run, let the house flood, and let the buyer be responsible. That's not what the contract stipulates. The contract strictly defines and says the following, that any new issues with the property, the seller is still responsible to repair. So if the AC is broken, guess what? The seller within the time frame must repair it and must disclose that to the listing agent, or excuse me, to the buyer's agent. And the buyer's agent is going to relay that information to the buyer. So absolutely, if it's still during escrow, the responsibility falls on the seller to fix if it's something that happens during escrow. Now, it's a very catch-22 situation, and I want to be very clear on that, because how do we know that it happened, and how do we know that it didn't happen and that was just broken? So this is why the home inspection is crucial, because the home inspector will check everything. They'll check the AC, they'll check everything. And if it doesn't work, then they're going to note it on that report. And you know that this was not a situation that just happened. This was something that was already broken. Therefore, the seller cannot come back and say, well, you know, it's been broken for years and we're just disclosing that. But if it happened during the escrow period, then therefore the escrow the seller must take care of that and fix it before the deal closes. Okay. All right, Emilio, thank you, brother. Appreciate you. I'll see you tomorrow morning at our Producers Mindsets. Thank you for being on the call. So yeah, absolutely, 100%. You know, so if it is something that happens during escrow, then yes, the seller is responsible. Repair required by state and local law, exams, point of sale braces of water heaters, retrofit slides and shower doors, installing operable smoke detectors. A law enable cost of repairs to be negotiable, but parties may not contract and avoid them. So These are some of the things that are, you know, state law and federal law. If it's state and federal law, then the seller cannot say, well, I'm not going to do it as part of that request. No, if it's federal or state mandated, folks, then it must be included as part of the seller's responsibility to make sure that, one, the water heater is braced, two, that the smoke detectors are installed and are working properly, and also the carbon monoxide as well. So those are things that are very inexpensive, but it has to be done prior to close of escrow. And the appraisal will note those too as well. So remember, people are watching. So when an appraisal goes out there, they're going to look at the water heater, they're going to look at each of the ceilings to make sure they're smoke detectors. And if the appraisal notes that there was no showings of smoke detectors, that's a condition, because who gets that report? The lender. And the lender may red flag that and say, look, we're not going to lend on this until the seller puts those smoke detectors, braces the water heater. So again, there's eyes throughout the initial process. Be very careful if the seller comes back and says, well, you know what, all properties are sold as is. Well, state laws and federal laws are exempt from that. Is the seller obligated to make any repairs? The answer is no. As I mentioned, all properties are sold in as is condition. Paragraph 11 states property improvements may not be built to code and compliance. Yeah, if a house was built in the 1950s, it cannot for any reason be up to code to 2021 codes. Okay, that's how the property at that time was. So you cannot ask the seller, say, hey, the property is not up to code. You know, you got to get all these conditions up to code. The answer is no. The buyer can request, but the seller can decline that request and say, look, this is how I bought the property. This is the original. And back in the 1950s, this is how the house was permitted. So therefore, the seller does not have to do any of the compliance when it comes to the codes. Okay, so I hope everyone's on the same page on this, that if the RPA clearly states that any improvements not built to code in compliance with the current law or have the permits issue, no conditions must be disclosed by the seller, but they are not required to be repaired. Very simple, folks, okay? So what I'm saying is that home was built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 20 years from earlier. That was permitted at that time. Doesn't necessarily mean now the seller does not have to bring up the codes and all that stuff that is current. So I just want to make sure that all of you are on the same page when it comes to that.
Simon, quick question on that.
Yes.
How does retrofitting fit into all of that, into that discussion?
That's a very good question. Certain cities, such as the city of Los Angeles, is known for their 9A report, right? And that 9A report emphasizes and stresses on the retrofit. Now, every agent that I hear has their own opinion on what retrofit means. They say, retrofit, does that mean they're going to reinforce the house? The answer is no. Basically, certain cities, because of what we're facing right now, water shortage, right? Semi-drought. So what they're requesting as part of the retrofit is that, again, I'm just basing it from the city of Los Angeles, is that they may ask for low flush toilets. They may ask for low shower heads, right? To reduce excessive water. Also, certain areas of the sliding glass doors in the shower, also the shower pans, to conserve and save water. That's what the retrofit. Now, again, certain cities will require that the seller do those. And for the most part, if you've lived in the property for numerous of years, a lot of those have been replaced. You know, toilets may be replaced. I don't think that a toilet that was built in the 50s is still probably there. You may already have an approved low flush toilet. You may already have approved water valves already that conserve water as well. So that's what it indicates when it comes to certain retrofit perspectives to that. But more so, like the city of Los Angeles, you know, you can get that waived, or you can say that, you know what, we're selling it as is. But again, they can ask for that request, and the seller may allow that, the seller may do that repair, or say, you know, as part of the condition that they don't. But if it is red flagged by the FHA, then they may decline the loan. So special considerations when it comes to, you know, these particular loans, then they may request that. But a lot of the cities, you know, in the South Bay, the West Side, Long Beach, they're not required, so you can still transfer without doing those retrofits. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, we should be almost done. Special considerations, repairs of conditional by seller may be required. So now if it's an FHA or a VA loan, the appraisal may put these requests. Now, these are government loans. If the property is accepted as a government loan, such as a VA or FHA, and the underwriter, or excuse me, the appraisal writes it on their reports, unfortunately, those requests cannot be declined, okay? Now, and the reason I say it cannot be declined is because if you say, the seller can say, I'm not gonna do it, but then the buyer will not be able to get the loan. So in good faith, it is to the seller's advantage to do those repairs, because now the buyer will continue. Otherwise, don't accept a buyer that has an FHA loan or a VA loan, because you're going to get additional requests from the appraisal if the house is not in the best condition. So I caution you, if you are submitting offers with a VA, you know, make sure that you and the lender are on the same page, or what are some of the concerns I should be facing when it comes to these type of loans and the conditions that the appraisal may include. So the use of the FHA or the VA notice and addendum to make a request for repairs of these loans. So when you submit an offer, you also submit an offer with this addendum, which is the FHA or the VA addendum, the VFA form. Okay, and guess what? A lot of agents unfortunately fall short, do not submit this, and ultimately your lender will probably ask you, did you send this form out? Or the lender will send out to the listing agent their provision of this VA FHA addendum form. Buyer should determine seller's response before removing this as a condition. Otherwise, lender may not fund in the buyer and can be in breach. So 100%. Just because it is an FHA or VA, is the seller responsible to do it? The answer is no, no. So, well, it's a federal government loan. I get it, but it's not a state or federal guidelines. So with these particular government loans, unfortunately, it's the weirdest thing. But these again only protect the buyer. Where if the seller says no to these conditions, then the buyer can back out of the deal. And even if the buyer had released this as a condition, only if the buyer got the seller to sign off on the the FVA form. So I just want to make sure that all of you are on the same page on this. Evaluating the repair request, okay? Material fact disclosure and the inspection reports must be disclosed, obviously, to the buyer. So any material facts, this is why you got to look at the TDS, the SBQ, all seller disclosures, and obviously all the inspection reports that the buyer does, in order for the buyer to make sure that they're doing their due diligence, but make sure that the buyer is completely satisfied with the overall condition of the home before releasing that as a condition. Because once the buyer releases that, guess what? The buyer cannot use that later and say, well, you know what, I changed my mind, I want to back out of the deal. Well, the seller may say you're in breach of the contract, and I feel like there was some damage here, so I'm going to go after some of that deposit. So I want to make sure that you're all on the same page and understand that when evaluating, that the buyer is looking at all the material facts that the seller disclosed, so that way the seller, that the buyer can make a sound decision to continue moving forward. If the buyer isn't satisfied with the repair, seller may face post-close negotiation or liability. This is a common reason for sellers to offer credit or price concession instead of making repairs. Absolutely. You know, as I talked to you earlier, it's the give and take, right? You want to give a little bit in order for you to, to continue with the process. So, it's a win-win for everyone. Alternatives to making repairs. Form RR enables the buyer to ask for repairs at credit, a price reduction, or all. Okay, so again, 1, 2, or 3. Ask for the repairs, ask for the credit, or price reduction, or all 3. You can ask for all 3. Seller may offer a credit or a reduction in price in lieu of making the repairs. Note, repairs of habitable conditions by seller may be required by buyers and lenders. If the lender disallows the credit, the lender's decision must be respected. The credit will not be paid. Solution: ask the lender about maximize credit in advance. So absolutely. So remember, if you are working with a buyer, you want to be very clear with the lender is, what is the maximum amount of money that I can ask for credit and concessions? So ask the lender, and the lender will say, look, based on this, you can ask up to 2%, 3% of the closing costs. At least you have that in your mind when you're negotiating. The maximum I can ask is 2%, or $10,000 or $15,000, because again, you don't want to have these conversations last minute, and now you're missing out on the opportunities when you could have been proactive about it from the very, very beginning. Okay, thank you, my man. I appreciate it. All right, and then again, any additional resources through the California Association of Realtors on request of repairs, the RR, all this stuff. If you're part of the California Association of Realtors, you can download a lot of the content material that I utilize is strictly from the California Association of Realtors. All right, and that pretty much wraps it up. Any final questions before we close? I know it's a lot of information, and I hope I was able to answer or address. And if you have any questions, this is the time. All right. Very good. Well, yes, Miguel.
Yes, when you emphasize that it's all about communication, as far as negotiating repair requests, what you're talking about is having conversations with the agent on the other side beforehand about all of these things before you're even submitting the RR or the other form. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Obviously you're going to get a copy of the home inspection from the very beginning, right? You go and do your inspection. Let's say you do your inspections tomorrow, right? It's going to take about 48 hours to actually get those reports. Once you get those reports, then you're going to sit down with your buyer and you're going to look at the reports and make a determination. And as I did earlier in role playing, I said, okay, what are some of the major concerns you want me to ask for, either repairs, credit, or price reduction? Well, the major things that I see here, Simon, is the AC. So once I know and identify with the buyer, what are the biggest concerns that they want me to address? And your job is to go through the whole list and say, look, I don't see this as a concern, but again, it's not me that's buying the property. You got to let me know what you want me to put on the request and repairs. Because remember, the agent is not buying the property, it is the buyer, right? They're going to be the ones responsible, right? They're the ones that are going to be responsible to make the mortgage payment. So it's not up to us, it's up to the buyer to make that determination. Once I know what I have, then I'm going to reach out to the listing agent and say, hey, look, I'm preparing the request of repairs, and I just want to prepare you before I send out that request. Here are some of the bullet points that my buyer is asking, and then at least be upfront about it and be transparent, but more so you're being proactive in your approach. And that's perfectly fine, because again, you're building that relationship with the listing agent, because you want to make this a win-win. So you don't want to just throw that request and ask for $20,000, right? Because when you ask for $20,000, they're going to be taken back like, whoa, this is crazy, this is insane. And then now they're going to use that reaction when talking to the listing, with their seller, and they may decline that. But if you're proactive in saying, hey, look, I want to prepare you, I'm going to be sending out this request. My buyers are first-time home buyers. This is their first home. I've educated and I've told them, but they're still a little bit hesitant in, they want to at least some of this stuff done, work with me on this. And then send out the request and see what happens. That's what I would do. Okay. Good question, by the way. All right. Awesome. Anyone else? All right, cool. I appreciate you all for hanging out with me for a little over an hour and 20 minutes. I definitely respect your time and thank you for hanging in there. These are valuable classes to take advantage because these are life scenarios that you'll be involved in when it comes to requests and repairs, guys. So please, please, please take advantage of the classes that we have to offer. For the people tomorrow, love to see you on the producer's mindset. I will be spearheading that in the morning. Jump on those calls, guys. Again, to jumpstart and get that pump blood flowing in your mind and in your body. Be ready 8 o'clock tomorrow for the producer's mindset. Okay. So hope to see you tomorrow as well. And then I'll see you guys on our next contract class. Take care, guys. Have a phenomenal afternoon. Be safe, and I'll see you later. Thank you.